I've spent years optimizing my life, and now I'm too afraid to live it. Right, now that the obligatory hook for YouTube videos has been uttered, let's get into the episode. So, I just moved home, country, and job, and here's the lesson that I've learned from that experience. But before that, a bit of history. I lived in Edinburgh for 30 years. I grew up there, I went to school there, I went to university there, and I worked there. For a plethora of reasons, I became increasingly interested and more recently obsessed with optimization and productivity. You can probably trace that back to my childhood. When I was small, I would literally write a book about life, a handbook for living life, but I guess that's a different story. But over the years, the interest in productivity and optimization slowly morphed into obsession. How can I squeeze more and more out of the day? How can I learn more? How can I achieve more, do more? How can I be more healthy? I tried all the various ways to write a to-do list. I tried all the supplements. I watched all the podcasts. But I found that the harder I worked, the more I craved rest. And the harder I worked, the harder I found it to rest. It was a catch-22. And don't get me wrong, I craved rest. And I still do. And I would look forward to a day off. But when that day off came, and I attempted to rest, when I tried to do something unproductive, I'm putting that in quotes for those of you that are listening, because rest is productive, of course. But when I tried to watch TV or play video games, I would find it unbearable to such an extent that I would reach for the laptop to do more work, or I'd reach for the laptop to do something else. Anyway, more recently, it got to the point where I had optimized my whole life. I whittled my days down to a to-do list, and any deviation away from that to-do list I found overwhelming and frustrating. So any spontaneous plans were unbearable. It got to the point where simply going outside for a coffee was an occasion. It was planned for far in advance. Spending time with family, spending time with friends, that was all planned for. And the reason I planned these things was so that I could spend as much time as possible being productive in service of some future goal. Now, a funny thing happened when I actually realized this, because I was literally out with a close friend. We had met during the day at one of my favourite pubs in Edinburgh for a pint, and then we had a walk around an art gallery. It was a lovely day. But all I could think about was, what is this pint of lager going to do to my sleep? And what is this pint of lager going to do to my performance and productivity tomorrow? And I realised that's me starting to sound like Stephen Bartlett. And I didn't want to become a meme, so I knew something had to change. But it wasn't until literally the next day that I started to long to be back in that art gallery, wandering around with my friend. But why did I feel like that now, when I was literally in that experience the day before, longing to be elsewhere or thinking about other things? Now, after inputting this experience into ChatGPT, because that's the world we live in now, I found some answers. Firstly, Daniel Kahneman and Jason Riis wrote a chapter in The Science of Wellbeing called Living and Thinking About It, 2 Perspectives on Life. And it talks about the very experience I had. They argue that there are 2 selves, an experiencing self and a remembering self. The experiencing self, as the name suggests, is the self that experiences the present moment, smells, tastes, sounds, thoughts. And the remembering self, again, as the name suggests, is the self that remembers that experience. The key point here is that these 2 selves are different, vastly different. First of all, memory is not an accurate depiction of what the experiencing self experienced. The remembering self tells a story about the information it receives, which isn't necessarily an accurate account of the experience itself. And so if we take the art gallery, for example, the experiencing self was experiencing fleeting thoughts, distraction, thoughts about my to-do list, and thoughts about what this lager is going to do to my sleep. The remembering self, however, the next day had conjured up this rose-tinted story that was in opposition to my current present. The next day I was probably working, or I was at my laptop writing. And so my mind was trying to make me long to be back in that rose-tinted story I had conjured up. And so the remembering self is telling a story. It's not fact. You can either be seeing a memory through rose-tinted glasses or remember it fondly when maybe it wasn't as fond as you remember. Or you could also do the opposite. You could be seeing a memory through poo-tinted glasses when the experience maybe wasn't as bad as you're making out. But neither is a true representation of the experience itself in the present. Just because I look back at a memory fondly doesn't mean I fully enjoyed it in the moment. Now, what does this have to do with me moving country? Well, my girlfriend moved first, and we spent about 6 months apart. And during that time, I retreated further into my to-do lists and my routines and my plans. And so I spent even less time making plans with friends, doing anything spontaneous. I didn't have someone pulling me away from my productivity and my to-do lists. And I mean that in the best possible way. But I retreated further into myself. Because she wasn't making plans for us, I lived even more by the book. I planned my days. I narrowed my vision towards my to-do lists. And I did that even more than I had been doing the previous few years, and I'd spend less time with friends. Luckily, I didn't spend no time with friends, and I'm grateful that I actually made those plans, but I could have been spending more time with friends. And then when I eventually did move, I was forced to live life more vicariously because, one, I moved in with my girlfriend in a house share with 4 other people, and so I was alone less. And 2, all of my stuff was packed away, and so there was less opportunities to be productive. But crucially, I was forced to simply live and think more about what do I actually want to do with my time? What do I want to do next? What do I feel like doing next? Because I hadn't really experienced that. I was living so much by the book. I was with that, like that made the decisions for what I was going to do next. What am I going to do next? Well, the to-do list tells me that. And so I was forced to then start thinking, what do I want to do? And that meant less planning, less meal prepping, less productivity. But importantly, not no productivity, just less. For instance, I still went up to Edinburgh and recorded a podcast episode in a studio, and then I still edited that podcast, but I edited the podcast in a pub. Now, I never would have taken myself to a pub in Edinburgh to edit the podcast. I had a flat for that. And I know it sounds small and perhaps it's insignificant, but I never would have done it. I always just thought I can just do it in the flat, so why would I bother? What's the point? Is it productive to be in a pub amongst people with the noise and all that sort of thing? But I loved it. I loved going to the pub, and I was still being productive. I didn't have to choose between pub and productivity. I could do both. And that's the point. When we live in the same place, we have the same routines every day, we get so comfortable with that, and then we're less likely to get out of our comfort zones. And then when we eventually do get out of our comfort zones, we wonder why we hadn't done that before. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still very much a homebody. I love being in my flat and I love my home comforts, but I realized I was living my whole life in my home, living life by the book. It's almost as if we fear that living a little or going outside amongst people will halt all productivity. But crucially, it doesn't halt all productivity, and if anything, it spurs on more productivity, especially if you're in the creative industries, because when you go out and you actually live a little and have a life, you've got something to draw on. You're not just sitting in the house, because you've not got any life experience to draw on, and people will find that a bit boring. But I mean, Imagine I hadn't noticed this. People go their whole lives living life by the book, in service of some future goal that arrives and disappears just as quickly as it appears because they're already on to the next goal. They're already thinking about what's next. I mean, sure, that's a surefire way to achieve a great deal, but at what cost? One of my favourite quotes is from Thomas Sowell, and he says there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And so we have to ask ourselves, what trade-offs are we willing to make to achieve success in the future? I'm certainly not willing to trade my whole present life in service of my future. I want to actually enjoy the present, and I don't want to get to the end of my life or to get to the next goal and look back and feel like I've traded off too much that I didn't want to. When we live our whole lives in service of the future, we build a life that we will remember fondly because we will look back and be proud of what we've achieved, but we're looking at that life through rose-tinted glasses. We're remembering wrong because maybe we weren't enjoying the present moment. Well, maybe we weren't as fond of the present moment as we're making out in the future. We try so hard to achieve goals so that our future selves will remember these achievements fondly, but were we ever happy in the present? Now, I'm all for achievement and success, but I don't want that to define my life. I want to spend my days working in aid of some purpose, as well as spending time with friends, and as well as enjoying the moment for what it is, not for how I'll remember it. Now, moving country was something big. It upended my life, and so of course it would change me considerably, and it would force me into novelty and force me to reevaluate my life for the better. But what I want to know is, are there ways to force this sort of reevaluation without such a big change in life being necessary? What life events need to occur to force this sort of reevaluation of your life, to have this sort of revelation? We all evaluate our lives. We at least do it once a year when we make New Year's resolutions, but so many of those New Year's resolutions are hollow, and a lot of us just give up on them at the end of January. And they're usually just small, simple things, like I want to add this habit into my life, or I want to subtract this habit from my life. They don't usually inspire revelation. And there are many other life events that could force this sort of reevaluation: the death of a loved one, a breakup, disease. But do we have to wait on something so negative to occur before we reevaluate our lives and ask ourselves these questions that we're too scared to ask? I mean, I've tried various life evaluation strategies, from Chris Williamson's end of year review to Tim Ferriss's fear setting. But, I mean, neither of these really stuck with me. And don't get me wrong, they were very useful, but they didn't have the same effect as moving country has had. And maybe it's unfair to expect these life evaluation strategies to have the same effect as moving country. If you've got any ideas, please let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to know this. This lesson doesn't necessarily come with a solution. It's more just me asking questions that I want to know the answers to, because I think it's important. I guess if there's a lesson here, it's to find ways to intensely reevaluate your life. Ideally, you wouldn't wait for a negative life event to occur, or a massive life event like moving country, before you do this, but we need to find ways to ask ourselves the questions that really force a change in our current perspective. Am I in the right job? Am I spending my time the way I want to? Am I in the right country? Am I working so hard in the present that I'm sacrificing it for a future goal? All these questions we should be asking regularly, but we seem to fear asking them. Now, maybe we don't need to move country to have this sort of revelation. Maybe all we need to do is just carve out some time in our day to lie on the grass, put on some life-affirming music, and ask ourselves these questions we're too scared to ask. Now, if you've got any ideas for how to reevaluate one's life, how to have this sort of revelation without having to move country, please let me know in the comments. If you've made it this far, well done. But it's been a big rambling episode, but that's just what I'm thinking about right now. But anyway, I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for watching or listening. Take care.